So we're here with Celia Hodent. We're having a talk especially directed at our current situation at Tec de Monterrey, and it's a roundtable. We'll just talk about user experience generally, and with not further ado, I'll let her introduce herself.
Okay. So what I can do, I can go through the slides. It explains it all. I'll try to go fast, so I don't want to use all the time for that. So my background is in, can you see it?
Can you see it on the, yeah? That's better, right?
Yeah. Okay, that works.
It's okay.
Okay. My background is in psychology. I had a PhD in psychology from France. And the past 10 years I've been working in the video game industry. So I first worked at Ubisoft in Paris, and then I moved to Ubisoft Montreal. And I was working with the playtest lab at Ubisoft Montreal, and also working on Rainbow Six. Okay. Then I worked on at LucasArts in San Francisco and on Star Wars games, like Star Wars 1313 that you might have heard of. But Lucas was bought by Disney, and so they closed LucasArts. So this is when I joined Epic Games. It was in 2013, and back in that day, they did not have any user experience or publishing or marketing group because they were just being separated with Microsoft. Microsoft was doing their publishing before. But at that time when I arrived, they were separated. So this is when they had to do all the publishing work to self-publish. And so this is, I was hired at Epic to do that, to bring UX and to train the people, to explain what it is, and to start working with some of the teams. And this is when I started working with Fortnite. That was just starting at the time. This is old, but this is from 2016. But the video game industry is really exploding, and this is now the industry, the entertainment industry, that's the biggest. It's over, I think now it's over $100 billion worldwide, and it's bigger than any other sector. So it's bigger than movies, it's bigger than music industry, and now bigger than sports industry. It just passed the sports industry. So now the video game industry is the biggest entertainment industry. It's generating a ton of revenue. But the problem is that, despite that, and still these are old slides, but Telltale now has been closed completely, and there's always layoffs in our industry. It's a very harsh industry. Studios are closing all the time. Games are not succeeding because there's a lot of competition. So we see the big titles. We look at Fortnite, we look at Call of Duty or GTA, and we're like, oh, this is awesome. We should all make games. But then it's a harsh industry because the competition is very fierce, and there's a lot of games that are free to play now, and it means that you need to get players engaged with your game for quite a long time before they can start paying. Whereas before it was box games, so you needed to pay before you play. So the business model is different. So because of that, you need to understand a little bit what user experience is, because you cannot just ship something thinking about, oh, I'm just going to create something in my little bubble and then put it out there and just wait and see if it's working or not. If you do that, you have a good chance of your games not being good enough, seeing problems too late to fix them. So what we do is we adopt a user experience mindset, which is we think about how our end user, our audience, is going to experience what we're doing. And so we look at perception and how people interact with the games, because we talk about games industry, but UX is something that's affecting everything, industrial design or web design. And relative to the design intention, so this is coming from Don Norman, who wrote the Bible for UX designers called The Design of Everyday Things. And he explains that when you're developing something, when you're a designer, you have your own mental model of what you want to design, but you know it very well. And so in the case of a game or anything that has to go into a computer, you already have some specific constraints with the system. So depending on the engine you're going to use, you have specific constraints. You don't have infinite time or money or people to make what you want to make. So it's already changed a little bit what you had in mind. And in the end, the user, so it could be a player in that case, they're going to make their own mental model of what the game is about, but only through their interaction with the system image. So the system image is everything that's at the interface between the player and the system. So it's going to be the controllers, it's going to be the sound effect, the animation, the user interface, all that. And the developers is not shipped with the game. They can't explain to the players how the game is supposed to be played. So we try to make sure that once the user has the game in their hands, what they experience of it is what was intended. And to do that, you need to have a specific mindset. You need to understand a little bit how the brain works, so you can anticipate problems. You're going to test your product very early on. You have a design thinking when you iterate, test, iterate, test, iterate, test, so you can make sure that what you're going to want to create is what people are going to experience instead of waiting until you're done with it and then you just look at it and people can't use it and you're like, oh my god, what do I do now? And so to have a user experience mindset, we think of people, there's a lot of people having UX in their titles. So you have UX researchers or UX strategists like me or UX directors. These are people usually coming with the background in psychology and human-computer interaction. They can bring the theory behind how people interact, how the brain works, and they bring guidelines and methods and all that. But UX is actually everything. It should be the concern of everybody because it's affecting everything. It's affecting designers, it's affecting engineers, it's affecting artists, it's affecting marketing people, consumer insights, and it's also affecting executives because you need to think about your strategy long term. So UX is really about everything. And so one of the things that's going to be important is to understand a little bit how the brain works so you can anticipate problems. So this is a very simplified representation of how the brain learns and works. It's not as simple as that, but just for the sake of the explanation, whenever you learn about something, it always starts with your senses. It starts with perception. And then you're going to learn about something specifically, and in the end, it's going to change something in your memory. It's making you synaptic connections and neurons connecting. And so it's really physically changing something. But during the process, there's a lot of stuff happening. There's factors that's going to influence the way you learn. And factors like attention can be making the learning process better or worse. So again, it's oversimplified, but I'm just going to very quickly take an example. Can you tell me what you perceive here? Do you see anything in particular?
Yeah, Street Fighter.
All right. Do you see Street Fighter characters?
Yeah.
Okay, so when I show this thing to people, some people will say, oh, there's Street Fighter characters, because they have a very strong connection with these specific games. Other people will be like, I don't know, looks maybe like
Socks.
yeah, socks or characters. And other people, you have like about 8% of the male population is colorblind. And they're not going to perceive it at all in the same way as other people will. So this is just to express that perception is subjective. We do not all perceive the same thing. We don't perceive the reality as it is. We are influenced by our background, our culture, our prior knowledge, our expectations. And so this is an example of what we do in Fortnite. Can you guess what is this icon representing in Fortnite?
Oh, it's a trap, perhaps, an obstacle?
Yeah, good job. It's a trap. So this was the very work in progress, like very placeholder thing, back in 2013 when I started. This is how the inventory looked like in Fortnite. And you can see that the traps are here. But I brought people, players, to play Fortnite a little bit, and then they had to interact with this, and then we'll pull them out of the game and ask them questions like, wait, what is this? And some players actually told me, well, this looks like ammunition. And if you look at the icon for ammunition, it's pretty close to this one. And so this is where, because traps is very important in Fortnite, this is where we iterated to change the trap icon to make it like a bear trap, even though there's no bear traps in Fortnite, but it's an iconic representation of traps, and so we changed it that way. So this is how we proceed. We just make sure that how people perceive it is what we intended, because we know the game too well. It's really hard for us to make sure that people are going to interpret it the right way. So this is how we verify that perceptions are the way we want it, so we can, if it's not the case, we can iterate. Now we're going to talk about memory a little bit. This is called the forgetting curve. This is the worst case scenario when you're trying to learn by heart some things that you don't care about. So Ebbinghaus was made a long time ago. He was learning syllables that did not have any meaning. And when he was recalling them immediately, he had 100% good answers. But after only 19 minutes, it was dropping down to 60%. And after a day, it was nearly dropping to 30%. Which means that in the worst case scenario, when you're learning about things you don't care about, with no methodology of any kind, that's not having any meaning, you're going to lose about 70% of the content you learn from one day to the next. And so in the case of video games, it's something we need to take into account because we need people to come back every day to play the game. And if they forget about too many things, then they're going to be frustrated because the game is getting more and more difficult. And so this is an exercise that we can do here. Do you know the sculpture, The Thinker from Auguste Rodin? Can you try to picture it in your mind and try to remember on which leg or legs lay which arm or arms of the thinker? Can you remember the posture?
Right arm.
Right.
Right arm?
It's the right arm, the rest is...
On what? Which leg?
It's like on the left leg, like that, right?
That?
You see?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
So he has actually both arms laying on the left leg.
leg.
And many people actually don't remember it perfectly. They just think it's like this, or maybe it's like this, and they only think about one arm. And this is just a way to express that when we try to remember about something, we don't have a clear picture of what we remember. The brain does not work like a computer. So what we remember is an approximation. So to remember is a reconstruction. We reconstruct something in our minds. And so it's just approximating. And so our memory is fallible. So because we know that, we need to find tricks to make sure that players don't have to remember things that we don't care about. We don't want them, for example, to remember on which key they need to press every time they're next to a searchable object. So we're always going to give that away on screen, and that's the reason why for complicated game you have a HUD with a lot of information, the heads-up display, so that people do not have to remember these things. They do not have to remember what weapons they have, if one weapon is in cooldown, what sort of abilities they have. They don't have to remember what key they need to press to enter the build mode. This is really important. Or if they want to craft a certain object, we offer them a pinning functionality, so this is going to be pinned on the HUD. So then they do not have to remember how many copper ore they need to harvest to craft that thing. So these are all techniques that we can use to avoid players to remember stuff. We're going to play another game here. I'm going to show you some cards. You're going to choose one card and remember that card, but I'm going to go pretty fast. So choose one card and remember it. Right. I bet I can guess which card you picked and make it disappear.
Oh my god.
No.
Magic! So I changed all the cards. This is what we call in psychology change blindness. And this is tied to our attention. Our attention is very lousy. When we pay attention to one thing, we're not going to be able to pay attention to the other things. And this is how magicians do. This is called misdirection. So while you were paying attention to one card, then it could change all the cards, and you can't really perceive it because you did not have enough attentional resources to really process all the cards. So this is called change blindness, and it's just expressing that we have very poor attentional resources. Even though we think we can multitask and process a ton of things, we're just fooling ourselves. And this is how magicians can do their job. And so in Fortnite, in other games, we need to avoid multitasking. So this is a video where we're trying to teach them about health. And so they're getting low on health, and so we're flashing this and telling them, oh, you've been hurt, you need to consume a health item to regen. But the problem is the players concentrated into destroying zombies. So they're not even going to perceive that something is changing in the environment. So this is something we really need to pay attention to, especially at the beginning of the game where the player is learning about all the mechanics, because it's requiring a lot of attentional resources, and we can't multitask. So all these things we need to take into account when we create a game so that people can learn about the game smoothly and have a good experience. So perception is subjective, attention is scarce, and memory is fallible. And this is how we come up with user experience for games, and this is how we break it down. So we break it down in two main concepts. One is called usability, the ability of the game to be used. Just like the ability of that cup, you know, like here's another affordance. So this is, the cup has a little handle here, and it forces me to grab the handle. It's easy for me to grab it. Now, if you have cups with a tiny little handle, no handles at all, and then you burn yourself, there's no good usability. I cannot use it. So that's usability. But for games, if a game is usable, it doesn't mean it's fun. So we need to try to understand what makes games fun. So we need to look at engageability, the ability of the game to be engaging. So usability is the ability of the game to be used, and these are some of the elements that we look into. We look at the signs and feedback, you know, can I tell from just looking at the game that I can grab it that way? So in terms of games, like, can I tell that how to kill that enemy? Can I tell what to do with this ability, etc.? So these are all the things that we look into. Like minimum workload is just what I was talking about. You don't want players to remember too much stuff, so we minimize the memory load. So that's another example. But here in a game like World of Warcraft, maybe artists are be like, oh, this is ugly, but the giant exclamation mark is really important for usability, because then as a player, you look at that and you understand that, oh, I can interact with that NPC. That's a clear sign that I can do something with that character. This is what I was talking about with the students. This is what we call affordance or form follows function. If you look at the enemies in Mario, it's clear what can be, how they can hurt you. Like this enemy is clearly tied to the ground, so you understand that it's going to be able to hurt you in that area. It's not going to chase you because it's tied to the ground. This one is going to be super fast in one direction. It's not going to turn around. This one is going to throw something at you so it can hurt you from far away. In Bowser, you understand that if you try to jump on it, you're going to get hurt because he has spikes on his back. So character design, environment design, all these things you need to think about how you can convey how the game works. Because here we want to challenge people into platforming. Platforming is the challenge of the game. If you think of a game like Monument Valley, we challenge people in perception because we play around with people's perception. In that case, it's all good to play around with it. But in that game, this is not where the challenge is. The challenge is in reflexes and understanding, how can you beat an enemy in platforming. So that was for usability and engageability. It's to make games engaging. So we look into human motivation. How does that work? It's more complicated because we don't have a lot of data so far. But we look at intrinsic motivation. People like to do something for the sake of doing it if they feel competent, autonomous, and if they can relate with other people. We're also looking at rewards and extrinsic motivation. We look at emotions, how we create emotions, and game flow, like keep them, in a flow where the game is not too easy, not too hard, good pacing, all these things. And the point that is really important is always to place the player in a situation where there's meaning for them to learn about something. Right? This is where we teach players in Fortnite how to build. We place them in a pit, and they can get out. And there's a chest over there. So they're curious about what's in there, and there's a giant exclamation mark above the chest. So this is where they can be like, oh, okay, I need to get out of here. How do I do that? Remember, you can build, and you can build stairs. So this is the first time that players in Fortnite are required to build because they're faced with a challenge. And so building is the solution to overcome the challenge. So we always try to put the players in a meaningful situation so they will want to learn about the specific mechanic from the game so that they can have fun doing it instead of feeling that they're just being bossed around. And then we have a pipeline where we try to always think about when we're going to do UX testing. It's part of the production pipeline because you need to save space for it. And we have specific techniques. So we do Epic Games. I developed a playtest lab. So this is where we're bringing people and we watch on the overhead screens what's happening. And this is the place where the designers and the developers, artists, engineers are here. And they can shout and cry and go, oh, what the hell? Because it's soundproofed, so the players can't hear them. So that's very good, so we can figure out where are the problems and fix them. And then we always try to figure out if we find a problem, where is it coming from? Is it coming from the reality of the design, or is it a problem of perception? Because sometimes it's not how it is in the design, in the loot system, for example, in the system design. It's because of the art on top of it that makes it look not as compelling as it is in reality. So this is what we use. These are just ingredients that we use to make up our own recipe. There's no one recipe to make successful games, but we need to figure out how we can convey the things we want to convey to our players. And that's it. So that's all I wanted to tell you about. And this is why user experience is very important, and video games are very important because it's the biggest industry now in entertainment. So it's becoming very big. It's generating a lot of revenues, but it's also a very harsh environment. So we need to figure out how we can make successful games so that people are not laid off all the time and games are succeeding. That's it. That's what I wanted to express to you, and this is what I'm doing.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
It was very
I was trying to be fast.
interesting. I love it. I love the talk. Well, I don't know. Do you want to talk? Give us some premise?
No, yeah. Okay, good. Well, I'll ask you the same question I asked back there with the students,
Yeah.
but I think it was very valuable, so let's have it. How do you see, well, I've seen people, I've heard people talk about user experience around almost everything. User experience around stores, user experience around a lot of different things. So how do you relate user experience to creative industries, other creative industries than games?
Yeah.
You know, like comic books or maybe animation or some other creative industries?
Yeah, just user experience is more a mindset than anything else. Do you want me to use the example of the warplanes? If you just look at architecture or gardens, if the architect of a garden or park is designing the alleys in a certain way, but without thinking about the user experience, and let's say that he's doing a very nice paved way, but people, like you're saying, are lazy, we just don't want to go around it, so we're here, there's a building here, and we need to go to the building there. People are going to cut through the grass.
Yeah, they're good.
And that's user experience. If you want to think about how to design the thing, you need to think about what people are going to want to do with the environment. And if they need to go from point A to point B, and if you force them to do that, this is not going to work. You need to think about what they want to do, and not you as an architect. Yes, it looks maybe more beautiful, but then it's not going to be beautiful in the end because people are going to cut through the grass, and then it'll be even uglier. So in the case of the warplanes, user experience is coming from what we call human factors. So it's very old. And it really boomed during the Second World War, where people were starting to realize that we are training a lot our pilots to be able to fly those planes, and they're still making mistakes and pushing the wrong buttons and dying and destroying the planes, despite the huge training they have, because from one plane to the next, it was not consistent. The cockpit would be changing. And so when you're in a stressful situation, you have a reflex to press, you know, if you're driving here in Mexico and then you go to London and all of a sudden you have to drive on the left side of the road, you're gonna be like, oh my God, I don't know how to drive anymore. Because you have all these automatic ways of doing things. And it was the problem with pilots. They were always having to be in a new environment, and in the stress of the war, they were pressing the wrong buttons and maybe sometimes die or damage the plane. These planes were made, depending on the design of the plane, the cockpit was made with an engineering-centered mindset because they wanted to make it faster and more efficient for engineers. But in the end, if the pilots need to be highly trained, and despite that, they're gonna crash the planes, then in the end, you're gonna lose a ton of money because you don't have the plane anymore. Sometimes you don't have enough, you have the pilot anymore, like the plane is dead. So the human cost and the cost overall for the plane is actually higher than if beforehand you think with a human-centered mindset and think about how we're gonna standardize all the cockpits so then the pilots don't need to be highly trained for every single plane they have to operate. So this is the mindset, or the same thing with doors. If you want to not have to put push or pull on the door, make sure that there's a handle on one hand so you know you need to pull, and there's a plate on the other side of the unlike here, of the door, so you know you need to push. So this is just a mindset, and it can be applied to anything. And the idea, if you remember the little thing that I showed you from Don Norman, is to align the intentions with what your audience is going to experience. So you need to understand who your audience is. Who are you targeting? You know, if it's a comic book, if it's a video game like Candy Crush versus Fortnite, not going to be the same audience. So who are you targeting? Trying to understand this audience. What do they understand? What are their expectations? So that you can make sure you provide them with what they want. And if you want to convey fear, or if you want to make them laugh, or if you want to make them cry, you need to make sure that this is what they feel. If you're trying to make them cry and using icons or stuff that for this population, they make them think about something funny, then you miss the mark. So you need to make sure you always put yourself in your audience's shoes to anticipate what is going to be their perception, their interpretation of what they do. And it's even more important for anything that people need to interact with, so objects or video games, because if people don't interact with it successfully, then the experience stops. Unlike a movie, like even if you don't get it, you might need to follow because it's just scrolling, it keeps rolling. But maybe people are gonna lose attention because they're not really into it anymore because they don't get it. But in case of games, the experience stops if people cannot interact with it and cannot go through the game.
You know, what really hit me the most was that usually we're more concerned when, well, I let Oriana tell us a little more about how we are handling the video game topic in the class, but usually when we address the video game issue, we're always worrying about if the 3D model is right, if the visual development, if the sound, if the program doesn't crashes, programming issues. But I think we have a lot to learn about integrating user experience and gameplay. Because ultimately, even if it has poor graphics or poor sound, or even if it crashes a lot, but if the game is fun, the people is going to play it.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something perhaps we should encourage to perhaps even make it part of our methodology, to give it a try, to give some testing about the user experience. It's been very, very mind-blowing, actually, the fact.
Yeah, and it's going to be, I mean, this is, again, it's going to only grow more, so it's going to be very relevant for students to find jobs, to be able to...
Yeah, because I just recently collaborated with BFS and
BFS?
Vancouver Film School.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because they are giving some scholarship, and there's a program that is video game design precisely, and they invited me to be one of the persons who evaluated the candidates for this scholarship. I just today reviewed about 10 or 15, I really don't remember. But most of the videos centered around look at my programming, look at my models, look at my visual, look at my art and the concept art, but no one ever gave a hint about what the game was supposed to be about, or the idea of the game.
How is it
Yeah,
played?
they're
Or how
more
it's
like
played.
super narrow focus on one. But I mean, all these things are important, but it's just like when you build, if you paint something and you just like paint a little corner and you never take a step back to look at how it integrates in the full scale, then you're gonna miss the mark because you can maybe make that tiny part very cool, but it's not bringing anything to the experience. So these two things are important. It's important to have some specialties. Engineering is important, animation, sound design, all these things are very important, but they need to be correlated with one another, and people need to always have the big picture in mind and know where they're going, and this is what UX is about. Know where we're going, who is the user, what experience we want to offer, and how we can get there together. Because when you design anything, it's all about choices. You need to make the right choices, you need to make the right trade-offs. There's no perfect game. You don't have to make trade-offs every time. You have to make the right trade-offs for the type of game you're making. So that part is really important. It's all what we call UX strategy.
Yes.
And that's the thing that is very new, and especially in the video game industry, we don't get it. And video games are so big that now people like think about gamification, like even like banks or whatever. They always want to add some gameplay value because we understand that games are more engaging when they're good. But how do you make a game good? Well, you make a game good by understanding, well, game theory, of course, but also user experience and how to engage people.
So, well, I've seen architects and industrial designers have a lot of experience with user experience. That came out wrong. But they're used to it, you know, like they know it's a part of what they're doing. But us in, you know, in digital arts, sometimes just focus on the visuals and forget a bit about user experience, but it's very relevant to what we're doing as well. So we should be closer to architects and industrial designers and engineers towards the user experience. What, do you have any questions or any?
Or
Yes.
do you want to share something with us about your class?
Well,
Okay.
something in the middle.
Okay.
I teach a class of the fundamentals of human-computer interaction.
Okay, cool.
And it's for artists, it's for engineers, programmers, and audio engineers,
Okay.
and for people in communications. It's for the four majors in the same classroom working on a project. I think they understand the principles, they understand
Okay.
usability, they understand the basics of user experience, but then they forget it. And some semesters later, I received the engineers in the video game course, and they have no idea. They are like, well, my programming is really fine, it's great.
Solid, yeah.
It's
Solid programming.
Yes, but why is it's
Yeah.
not fun? Why it's not engaging? Why? On Friday, they showed me their video games, and I told them, okay, don't tell me anything. Your game has to tell me
Yeah.
everything. I couldn't play
Yeah.
their video games, so it's
See, more and more in schools, students are required to do play tests.
yes.
So they bring, you know, because you're in a campus, it's easy to bring people in to test the game as long as they don't know the students or the game they're making well. And that's it. You just like put them in front of the game. You take notes. That's really a very important part of the process. That they realize like, why don't they understand it? It's so obvious, but it's obvious for you because you're in the game. It's not obvious for someone else. So more and more in schools they do that. They do the playtest section.
Yeah. In fact, I encourage them to do the playtest.
But they don't do it.
It's required 2 times, but they don't do more than 2 times. They only do the
Interesting.
times that are required. But my question is, when is a good time to learn about this? Some students learn it in 2nd semester, and then by 8th semester they forget all about it. Maybe it's something they have
So if
to
you
learn.
remember what we're talking about here, sorry.
It's a pretty good question. I'll add something. On the new courses we are, well, the new programs we are getting into next August. We have, we start with, you know, like a block. It's something close to a subject, I guess. That's human factors research. And there's a lot about user experience inside of that. But that's first semester. So it's kind of the same question because maybe we're making the same mistake.
Or maybe we can reinforce it.
Or maybe we can reinforce it.
Yeah, because perhaps we can give them the hint that it's necessary, that it exists, and then tell them that it's going to be used on several topics. For example, design fundamentals. You know, they approach it in the first semesters, but then they meet more advanced courses where it is needed to know they know the difference about using a round shape or a spike shape. Okay, and I try to remember them. Do you remember what we saw with your professor of design fundamentals? Well, here we're going to use it again.
Yeah.
Right? Because we just to make sure that we are reinforcing that knowledge, and perhaps not only the knowledge, perhaps the practice.
Yeah. So that's very important. So that if you remember the forgetting curve, every time you give players or your students reminders, what's going to happen is it's smoothing out the forgetting curve. At each reminder, it takes longer for you to forget about it. So that's going to be important, but also what's very, very important is the impact of learning by doing versus learning by reading about it. So if you just tell them, oh, remember that it's important, it's not going to be as efficient as if you ask them to do something. They fail, and then say, well, you failed because you thought about your own perspective, you did not bring people in, you don't thought about your user's perspective, and then you make them do it again. And every time you bring that up, you make them do something about it. You make them try to find out what's wrong in their design and iterate on it so that the users can understand it. So learning by doing is really important because when you learn by doing, you put more depth in what you're doing, in attentional resources. Because if you just read, it doesn't require a lot of attentional resources. If you have to do something with it, you really need to fully concentrate on it, so you put more attentional resources on it, so you're going to remember it better. So remind them regularly, but make them do something about it. Put them in a situation, like I was saying with Fortnite, put them in a situation where they're blocked, and they have to understand this better to overcome this challenge. And through this process, they're going to understand better what UX is about and what human factors HCI is about and why it's important, because it's always very important to put them in a situation where they understand why they need to master that, because if they don't, they're going to fail. Their product's not going to sell or stuff like that. And it has a huge impact.
Yes.
I think, well, I try to have practical exams, but I think my problem is that I don't know how to iterate on those exams, because I give them a problem, they fail, but then they have a fail mark in their semester. Mm-hmm. And they are, why? It's really subjective. We have to iterate a lot more. But we have a really constrained time, really little time to have, I don't know, 7, 8 tests during the semester, and keep improving on that. And what is the grade that I should give them in the first try? That they're going to fail. But if I put them I don't know, a 5, for example, then they are angry. They start telling me.
Yeah, that's one with grades.
Yes.
It has a lot of stakes.
Perhaps be focusing more on the process than on the grading them. If, okay, you're going to get an A. It doesn't matter if your game is bad, but you need to know it was bad.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
you
I have.
need to have the evidence that you somehow through testing
improved.
Found out that it was bad, and you improve it, even though in a company it wouldn't have said. Okay, but at least you know that there's a methodology and you're applying it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But so that's the problem with our society. We have too much. We fear to fail, where it's important to actually fail early, so then you can get better at it, and the progression is more important. So if they fail the first time, they understand why, and then they can get better, and then have a very good mark. Great, then they can understand better what happened, and they can feel good about how they progressed. But in our societies, we always like, oh, I had a 5 or a D minus or whatever, so it's awful because it feels like you're being judged instead of thinking about the process. So that's another layer of problem with the educational system. I get that grades are important to see your progress and also to at some point evaluate students, but when they learn, it's creating what you're talking about.
I think it's a challenge to teach user experience and usability and design because of these problems.
Do you need to grade them early on? Can they do something? So something that works pretty well is to have the students evaluating each other. So they look at what the others have created, and so it's always easier to see the problems in others than in ourselves. So by doing that, they go through the process of thinking what is wrong with this and analyzing it, and not just say it's shit. So that's not really useful. Trying to understand what is not working well in someone else's before they are able to do it with their own stuff. So that's something maybe you can think of. But it has to be done in a way that people don't feel judged. So that's a problem. So maybe it has to be completely anonymous, stuff like that, because it's hard to have your peer, judging your stuff.
I'm really liking a lot about this talk It's wonderful. But for me, it's that I just have a flashback because I graduated from the school of computer engineering, and I remember my programming days, and I just wanted to program. That's all I wanted to do, to code. Just like that. Computer engineering, software engineering, no thank you. Those tests, those documents, no good for me.
Yeah.
And then I started becoming more aware that, hey, that's where the true leadership, that's where the true innovation comes. Because you need to code something, there are massive coders out there, and they have to follow the rules and other standards. But to make good prototypes, to make good planning and designing, it's where the real leadership is. And since that moment, I try to encourage all my students to give pre-production, to give design and planning, well, the respect it deserves. And not just because it doesn't look good, or it's not coded, it means it's less. And well, actually, I think it's where the real work is done.
Yep.
And then I'm making sense.
No, it does make sense. Because in the end, it's not how many features you're going to put in your system that's going to work. If you look at Apple, and this is what Steve Jobs was good at, is even though it was not necessarily very structured, but he was always thinking about the user. Like, are the user going to be able to like it? And if you look at iPhone versus BlackBerry, BlackBerry had way more functionalities, but the iPhone was more emotional to use. It was more interesting. The interaction is interesting. It's just like beautiful. There's just one button, and a lot of people are like, "Come on, no one's going to use just one button. That's going to fail. It's not enough. All the functionalities that people need are not in there." That's not what matters. What matters is our relationship with an object or a system. It's the emotions that we have, and so this is why true leadership is coming from there, like trying to anticipate what the emotion is going to create into people. This is what Don Norman calls emotional design, and this is what we find out in engageability, because you need to make an interface engaging, and to do that, it's not just about the code, it's about the whole experience. Like in Apple, they even think about marketing. How are they going to market? Like, think different. I don't know if you remember the advertisement from the 80s, where you have the person like breaking everything, like think different. Like already, if you're buying Apple, you're an elite, you think differently. It's like making you feel good. Like you already feel good by giving your money to Apple because you're different. And then you get the box, and just the box is beautiful, it's slick, and you open it, it's like, ooh.
Yeah, you don't want to throw it away.
Exactly. Exactly. So they consider the whole experience, not just the interaction with the system. So when you talk about user experience, you talk about the whole experience. So that is what it's important. It's not the functionality, it's not the coding, it's the experience that people are going to have with it.
Okay, and I do have, I know it's a complex question, but at the same time, and you're the person to ask it to. So,
we'll see.
Yeah,
no pressure.
The problem.
Well, maybe not the person to answer it.
No, yeah. Well, I've taught some classes on game design before, and we are planning on having a games 2 years program to integrating in maybe 3 years. And
it's going to be one of the specialization
programs
Cool.
with
roads. I don't know.
With visual effects,
Animation
and visual strategy. But with games, I've had one problem. Teaching games, I have one problem. It's different what the students say they want to do with their game.
Yeah, they don't seem to understand what they want to do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's different what they say they want.
Yeah.
That's normal. I think that's normal for everything in life. But what they say is, they say something, and it's different what they really. It's different than what you would think they want, and that what they really want is really hidden deep down. How can we reach that more efficiently during a game design session or a game design class? Because they take too long, and I'm telling you, longer than a semester or a whole year.
Games and small games. So,
Okay, okay.
do you have, can I get, that's what's cool about it, because it's starting by analog games, so board games, and they also explain how to take a digital game and make it into a board game.
Wow.
That's a process that's really interesting. But by making like small exercises very often, this is where you get to fail more often and then get to fix it in the next design. That's the thing. If you try to, at the beginning, make them to have a project on the whole year, this is way too long for them to have the whole cycle. So you might want to do, so I don't know what you were expecting to do, but you want to have like small cycles at the beginning, and then more towards the end, they have to have a whole year where they have to.
They need to understand that game design, if they are going to learn the game design, perhaps they are not even going to program or even draw anything. They are going to actually learn how to make testing, how to make a prototype, even if it's a paper and cardboard prototype.
Yeah, well, that's what I do actually. I do board games with them,
Yep.
and a lot of the small games, but
So what is it?
somehow it's not enough.
Yeah.
I haven't read that book yet. Maybe I'll have some fresh ideas.
Yep.
I haven't used yet, but
So what do you do a postmortem with them once they're done?
yeah, the postmortem, yeah.
And so they're not able to analyze what
Yeah,
wrong with their-
they kind of get to it, but they take too long.
So maybe you can use, the stuff in mind.
Yeah,
the
I'll see
usability,
what, yeah.
the usability, engageability,
Yeah, that's
the ingredients.
Yeah.
So they have, the ingredients to take a look, or when they analyze their games, this is actually what we do. We look at, all right, do we have a problem with the signs and feedback? Do we have a problem with consistency? Do we have a problem with farm forest function? Okay, it's not a problem here.
Yeah,
Maybe it's a
that's
problem
what
with engageability. Is it the motivation? Were there clear goals for the players? So, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff in my book that could help you out.
Yeah.
It's not designed for teachers.
no,
But
I get it.
you can reuse these things to help students to try to find out what are the problems they need to solve. Because fixing problems is easy. Fixing the right problems is the difficult part.
Yeah, that's the difficult part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe
Okay.
use that. So what I was doing is I was printing out the thing I showed you with the ingredients, usability, engageability, because there's check marks.
Yeah, the check.
So you can print that and give them to them, so they can actually think about their every step.
Yeah,
try to
what I
find
was
where-
telling, at least they are going to be aware that they need to take all those dimensions into consideration.
Yep.
And they're going to, the first thing they're going to do is, oh my God, I hadn't thought about that. Where's the draw? Where's the character? Where's the story? No, man. The character is going to be a dot,
Yeah.
and you're going to have to make it fun.
Yeah, but you can tell them, look at Minecraft,
Yeah.
look at Tetris. There's a lot of games just all about the gameplay, all about the systems. So some games are all about the story and all about graphic design. Yeah, but not all games. So they need to find out what type of game they want to do. And if you need to teach them about gameplay, it should be super abstract so they can get you really to the core of it before thinking about the story and the
Yeah, I think
beautiful
some
graphics.
students will be more sensitive to that. Somehow.
But they need to understand there are a lot of things, and I mean, they need to understand the value of gameplay. And I know it myself. I've experienced it myself. I bought some crappy games just because of the art, and they are terrible. I bought it just because I wanted to look at the job of Joe Madureira. That's it, but the game sucks, really. and I end up playing my old 16-bit games or Super NES or something like that because they were fun, actually.
Absolutely.
Now, and we can tell the students, well, you want to make a crappy game? Well, then you better have a hell of a art so they can buy it just because of the art, right?
Yep.
I'm sorry.
No,
I became too emotional, sorry.
It's all
Yeah,
good.
that's what happens with games, doesn't it? It's like it's always emotional.
Yeah.
That's why
That's
most of us are working in this
That's why we
industry.
care about these games, because they're emotional to us. We love them. We want to beat them. That's the cool part.
Yes. That's it.
Pretty pictures is not always enough.
I don't know how we are with about time because it's been wonderful. I think. Do you know how much time do we have?
Yeah, we could do a couple of more back and forths and.
You were supposed to be gone in 40
Yeah,
minutes.
he
so
didn't
he's
want
like,
to
no,
leave.
whatever, I'm gonna stay.
I think I can stay.
It's good. I engaged you.
How about we give a closure?
Yeah.
What do you think? So that this video has some shape after all?
So, yeah.
It's
That's the
wonderful.
magic of edition. That's where Christopher will help us.
So, yeah, UX.
Yeah,
We
I
have
think
10 minutes more.
I think we would a good closure would be to ask you some personal thing about your career. I guess
I
that's
don't know if it's super
it's
interesting,
getting-
but
No,
No,
that's
no,
super
no.
interesting because you know
Okay.
what happens with the students? Students are going to watch this and they're going to say to Oriane, hey prof, hey teacher, I saw a video and they are telling me the importance of game design. And Oriane is going to be like, okay, I told you that last week, but you weren't paying attention.
yeah.
They need some external force to come and make
Okay.
them understand.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because yeah, exactly. When they see you every day, sometimes you
Yeah.
tell them something and they just go through it.
Yeah.
But well, it's just let's point out to a very specific situation. What would you say is what has been your greatest professional challenge as a UX researcher, and how did you solve it?
I think that's a good question.
Yeah.
One of the biggest UX challenge for me was to bring UX strategy to a company, like whether it was LucasArts or Epic Games, where they did not know what it was and why they should care about it. Because there's a lot of misconception about it. There's a misconception about, oh, but UX is all about making the game more usable, therefore you're going to make the games more easy. And, you know, I love Dark Souls, and don't you dare kill Dark Souls. And you're like, what are you talking about? If the experience you want to give to your players is one of suffering and very being precise for your players, and we're absolutely going to help you achieve your sadistic goals. There's no problem. So we're not here to change the design intentions. Or sometimes like, yeah, but you know, I've been doing games for 20 years. Like, why do I need a psychologist all of a sudden to help me out? Well, you might need a psychologist because making games is difficult. It's not because you made a success. At some point, it's easy to replicate that success because it's hard to find out what made it a success and what's important to focus on. And when you have big teams and games, again, are a lot of competition, it's more and more complex, you need to stay focused, and this is the part that's difficult, and just like being able to assess what's going on and find out what the problems are. So that's important, and you need to understand how the brain works, so you can also communicate with more junior people who might not really have that good feeling what's going to work and what not work. So all these things, you know, it's very challenging to make people understand that I'm not, you know, I come in peace, you know, I'm not here to be against them, I'm here to help them accomplish their goals and not my goals. I should not give opinions, I'm always here to give an analysis so they can achieve their goals. So that's always a big challenge. And I think doing it at Epic was a really cool challenge because it was all of this, you know, like new coming to UX with a lot of very talented and senior developers, and trying to make them understand, you know, what I can bring to them. That was a big challenge. Fortnite was also a challenge, but I'm not sure if it was the biggest challenge because I worked with them very closely, and that was a very cool challenge for me because with Fortnite I was able to come in very early on, and I was able to really refine my approach to UX because it's very new in the industry. There's not many people who have a game UX framework, so being able to refine my framework with them, and it ended up with a massive success. That was not my biggest challenge because it was hard, but not as hard as trying to convince people who don't necessarily want to work with me. Like with Fortnite, they wanted to work with me, and we worked together in very good intelligence and respectfully with the different disciplines, and that was awesome to see how it's shaping up and how we could, like, step by step, having a good process and a good mindset. So that was a great challenge for me. Maybe not the hardest one.
All right.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess, and sort of.
Sort of. Okay.
So yeah, but well, I know as it is right now, if someone wanted to be a UX professional like you, whoever wanted to be a UX expert would be more likely to go into psychology, right?
Human factors.
Human factors.
Human-computer interaction.
Human-computer interaction and
which is a branch of psychology.
But coming from our position here, if someone studied, like programming or art or whatever, and they wanted to get into user experience because it's important for them, like an industrial designer or an architect would go into user experience, which route would you recommend for them?
But they usually, architects have human factors.
Yeah. I mean, no, but I'm not saying as a subject, like a subject in the program.
Yep.
Like in life, what would they have to do?
Read that?
Yeah.
Read all those books and then.
Read the books here. So if you into games, like so far, like mine is the only one out there, but this is about neuroscience and psychology. You can read about understanding a bit better about what this means. So how the mind works is a good one. Like thinking fast and slow is very interesting to understand. How design. I should add Nudge in there. What is not in there? Nudge is also a book that's very good, and it's easier to read than Thinking Fast and Slow. I'll add it when I come back to the hotel. But you need to read also. Where's the Don Norman book?
Okay.
There it is. So Don Norman is a very good book to start because he explains exactly what UX is about, and there's a lot of examples from industrial design, from web design, from apps and all that. So it's a very, very, if you need to read one book, that should be this one. And then if you're interested in games and you need to read 2 books, then you should read right after. But start with Don Norman. That's the foundations. It's really interesting. And if you're more into HCI, I think Human Factors. I have a few books in there that you can look into. There's also the Interaction Design Foundation. You can look into that. They have online courses.
Yeah.
They're not too expensive.
I've read a couple of those.
Don't Make Me Think is a really good one too. It's quite fun and easy to read.
That was actually my first contact with user experience.
Yep.
Don't Make Me Think. It's a good book.
Yep. But you need to read the design of everything.
Okay. And how would you recommend us to sensibilize others about user experience? Also, because you've had that experience a lot.
The way I do it is actually play games, the stuff that I made you do, like, what is this? And you see that people don't perceive the same thing. Make them experience it. Okay. So then they understand, they're like, oh, okay, I understand it. Because until people experience it, they're always like, oh, it's not really, I get it, but it's not, it's the others, it's not me. So I can give you tips for that and exercises from cognitive psychology so that people understand, like students understand that, oh, I got tricked. Or you can make them start playing a game that they never played and make them be the playtester, like the naive player doesn't know anything about the game, and you just let them do it and you watch them and you see them be confronted to, they don't necessarily understand what's going on with the game, and then later on you can tell them, well, you missed it, you missed that, and it's not because you're stupid, it's because you didn't know anything about the game. So think about, and you play these sorts of games, so then they can, reverse, understand what it means. So they need to experiment it themselves. That's really important. Because I had a lot of people, for example, and when they watch players playing, like, oh, they don't understand how the minimap works, and it's stupid. It's the same way it works in many games. But then I remember when they were starting at the company and they were playing the game for the first time, and they did not understand the minimap or whatever. So, but they forgot about what they did not understand, because at some point, as soon as you learn about it, then you integrate it, and then it's part of your knowledge. But it's hard for us to remember the state we were at before when we were discovering things. We forget about this. So make them experiment it. Maybe tape them so then you can remember when you could not understand this thing, same thing for your players.
Okay.
I don't know.
Very good. Anything else?
Yeah, as a closure,
That's okay?
Well,
No.
no, I think I'm okay.
So, well,
you
something.
know, I was going to ask you about teamwork, about how interdiscipline work, because many people believe, people believe that because it's a video game, the only way you can get in is if you're a system engineering
Oh, no.
or a programmer. But the fact that you are, your major is in psychology,
Yes, I'm a psychologist.
and you
Very
work in
important.
video games,
Yep.
that means how many disciplines work together for a video game to take place and to come as a elite product.
Yeah.
Right?
This is actually what I love about this industry, because you get to work with designers, with system designers, with musicians, with graphic designers, with UX designers, and more about interaction design. Get to work with engineers like gameplay programmers or UI programmers or tools programmers, and you get to work with marketing people, you get to work with sound designers. It's a very broad industry, and there's a lot of different people from different disciplines that work together, and you have also researchers and people coming from psychology who help, people figure it out, and producers, they're here, to manage the time of everybody. What's really important in this industry is it's still a bit small. You need to network a lot. It's hard to get in if you don't know people, so you need to network, follow people on Twitter, try to follow what they're doing. Don't be too insistent, but try to connect with some people and meet them if there's, that's the reason why conferences are really important, because this is where professionals can meet with students and give them tips to get there. So that's really important to participate into these things.
Okay, well.
But yeah, you can, as long as you have some skills that are important for games, and like I said, there's a broad, various skills and various disciplines, there's a place for you. So community managers. Of course. So it's, yeah.
Thanks a lot, and
Yeah, you're very
thank you for
welcome.
having us here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Any final words or?
Spread the UX love. It's awesome. And I hope that video game studies are going to be big here, like game design, because it's the future. Everything is going to be about games, so I hope that we'll get there, and it's going to take more weight.
Okay. Well, thank you, Celia.
Thank you.
And thank you all of you for following us in this Christian network. We're going to have more videos in the making. Thanks for coming.